update. Chief of Habitat Elmer Bull, in accordance with the Commission's request, Chief of Habitat Elmer Bull will provide an update on the status of wild horse issues pending in Nevada. And where are we going to be talking about the tour that occurred? Is that going to be here, or is somebody going to talk about what happened on the tour? Commissioner Drew, do you have a...
My recommendation is I could provide that after Elmer's providing his report, if that's favorable.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Elmer Bull, Chief of Habitat for the Nevada Department of Wildlife. There's been a few things that have emerged in the wild horse or on the wild horse subject over the last few days. At the last commission meeting, I mentioned that the BLM had intended to do a wild horse gather in the Jackson Mountain Horse Management Area in northern Humboldt County. The BLM started that horse gather sometime within the last 10 days or so. I can't remember the exact start date. Shortly thereafter, a legal challenge was issued to that horse gather based on the fact that the use of helicopters during foaling season was outside of the regulations of the BLM, and that they perhaps hadn't proved that there was an emergency gather needed in that particular area. On Wednesday, District Court Judge Howard McKibben issued a restraining order against the BLM, prohibiting them to use helicopters in the southern portion of the Jackson Mountain Horse Management Area. So essentially what's happened, the original goal of the BLM in that gather was to get 600 or 700 horses out of that horse management area and get down to AML. As of the restraining order, issuance of the restraining order, they had gathered 300 horses. However, in the restraining order, Judge McKibben also said that they would be allowed to continue using helicopters in the very southern portion of the Jackson HMA, since they had proven that there was an emergency in that area. However, they're prohibited in using the helicopters in the northern part because, according to, in his opinion, they did not prove the need for an emergency gather. So they've gathered 300. This just happened a couple of days ago. I'm not sure if the BLM is continuing to work in that southern portion, but just another example of some of the challenges that they face in trying to deal with wild horse situations. And certainly the judge did agree that they proved that there was an emergency or a need for an emergency gather in that southern portion. And we'll see if they're going to continue working that southern portion. So there's another small horse gather going on in the Black Rock Desert area. That's being done by setting traps around water sources. That's been an ongoing project for a while, and it'll probably continue that way. Much lower impact type of or procedure or strategy in that one, but they'll continue working on gathering in that area. A couple of weeks ago, I was contacted by a gentleman named Bill Knowles, who works with the Arizona Game and Fish Department, and he had been tasked with gathering information from the 10 western states that are affected by wild horse issues. And the purpose of his inquiry was to have Nevada put together a white paper, essentially detailing the challenges that we're having with wild horse situations in Nevada. He was going to gather that information from the 10 western states, compile a report, and that report and probably subsequent discussion will occur at the next meeting of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. I believe that happens in July. So we view that as a good sign. It shows a combined effort on the part of the states that are being negatively impacted by wild horse issues, and it will be brought before that organization. So we'll see what comes out of that, but I think that's good. In our report, essentially we detailed some of the challenges we're having. One of those being that out of the 85 horse management areas in Nevada, 52 of those are currently over appropriate management level. In some cases in the neighborhood of 2 or 3 times AML. So we obviously have a huge problem along the line of wild burros. I think there's 19 burro management areas, and 17 of those are over AML also. We're also, we related to in this report that we're very concerned about the change of strategy that the BLM has announced, that being that they intend to actually kind of decrease the amount of gathers that are being done and increase the use of, castration of studs, administration of immunocontraceptives on mares, those types of more passive strategies as opposed to taking horses off of the range. So we related all of that, and he'll compile reports from the other states, and that will be presented at WAFWA. So maybe there's going to be this concerted effort on the part of all the states to put their heads together and try to figure out how to deal with this. I visited briefly yesterday with Jeff Fontaine from the Nevada Association of Counties. I mentioned at previous meetings that NACO is weighing opportunities for seeking legal relief relative to the horse management program in Nevada. They're still moving along in baby steps. They have hired a legal counsel. That individual is currently trying to gather information from the state's 17 counties to try to assess the economic impact of the horse management program on their counties, and to further ascertain whether they really have, whether NACO as an entity can move forward and have legal standing on this issue.
He really is.
So they're moving a little bit, but it's pretty slow.
It says he's
The one other item that emerged a couple of days ago, we received word that the Ely BLM district is proposing to establish guzzlers on the rangeland specifically for wild horses. Well, I should say the intent is to benefit wild horses. It's not that other wildlife would be precluded from using these guzzlers if they were constructed. However, we have some concerns about that strategy. It remains to be seen, and we'll certainly have further discussions with the BLM over this issue, but it's on the one hand, it might be an okay deal if the horses were at the appropriate management level or below. Efforts to distribute their use of the range that they occupy would probably be good, probably provide a little bit of relief on some of the natural water sources that get pounded to heck by the horses. But we are a little bit concerned that this might offer the opportunity to actually increase the AMLs in those areas based on the fact that the horses are going to be more distributed and maybe less impact on the range. So we'll continue to watch that one very closely and confer with Ely BLM on that. Like I said, that just popped up 2 days ago, so we've been in contact with them. Steve Siegel visited with one of their people. They said, no, it's not our intent to use this as a tool to raise AML, but it seems like that might be a natural scenario out of this thing. So we'll continue to watch that. That's pretty much what I had.
Okay. Any other questions?
Are they proposing those in sage-grouse habitat?
I'm not sure on that.
I'd like to know that, because one of the major discussions during the sage-grouse committee has been wild horses and their impact on springs, meadows, and the bird in general. So, if they're putting it into critical sage-grouse habitat, I mean, they're working against us at that point, and we need to know about that.
Exactly. No, that's a good point. Like I said, this just popped up a couple of days ago, so we'll be continuing to keep a very close eye on that one.
And then on the Jacksons, it was 5 or 6 years ago that they gathered the Jacksons the last time under a similar emergency. And I believe it was some of those horses, from discussions I've had, that got out to Palomino Valley and they were in such poor condition they died when they got there. I mean, the Jacksons have gone through this multiple times now, and we just don't seem to be getting any relief. It gets to crisis mode instead of management mode, and that's just beating that mountain up for wildlife.
Given the range conditions out there this year, there's plenty of this going on. There's no doubt. There's going to be a lot of those areas that are going to be in that condition, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, I might add one. They had their, on our field trip, which, by the way, was great yesterday, one of the questions to the BLM folks is that after a stay like this, the judge says, stopped the gather for the particular reason. Have they ever gone back after foaling season and collected horses? And the BLM response was, to their knowledge, they had not, that's not occurred, especially it's not occurred in Nevada. So given that they had money allocated and resources and whatnot, you know, and Jeremy, that's your recollection as well? So we're not looking at any relief after foaling season, it appears.
Okay, thanks, Elmer.
All right.
Commissioner Drew, you want to go ahead and give us a update on the tour?
Yeah, I'll give just a quick outline of what we did yesterday on our tour of Spruce Mountain, and then other commissioners who were there can provide any details that were pertinent that maybe I glaze over. But just at the front end, I'd like to thank Alan Janae and Caleb McAdoo from Elko Endow for setting the tour up, and they obviously spent a lot of time thinking out the things we needed to see and doing it in a timely manner. So I appreciate all their planning and input, and the other folks in the Habitat division as well as the Elko office that helped put that together. BLM also provided some field folks that were very helpful and informative during the tour, and I wanted to thank personally Terry Dobis and Matt Murphy for their contribution during the tour. We had about 20 folks altogether, maybe a few more, with 4 commissioners that took the tour in. Director Mayer obviously was able to participate. Our first stop was at the Worm Creek Ranch, which is a private property owned by Madeline Pickens, and she would kind of base a portion of her wild horse, or proposed wild horse eco sanctuary, out of that private property. She does have privately owned horses there now that she purchased from a reservation. And one of the things that she's doing that maybe a lot of folks outside of Elko County don't recognize is she has 2 smaller grazing allotments just north of that private property that she's looking to propose a change of use type of livestock from cattle to wild, or from cattle to horse, I shouldn't say wild horse. But that environmental assessment, it's an EA at this point, is in process, and a draft of that will be coming out within, it sounds like, the next couple of weeks. So something that the department, I'm sure, is tracking, and something that we'll want to be cognizant of when that comes out. And that would entail those horses that are on the ranch now, from what I understood from BLM's discussion. The larger eco sanctuary, which a lot of folks have probably talked about, would actually encompass the spruce allotment, and the spruce allotment is a very large allotment. One of the things I didn't realize, which I think is going to be huge in the whole thing, is that not only is it currently a cattle allotment, but it includes portions of 3 different herd management areas. I think really the take-home message that I got is, at this point, there's not a lot of details on the eco sanctuary proposal itself. It sounds like the BLM's doing some internal fact gathering and working with the proponent, and nothing's really been released to the public at this point in terms of detail. Her proposal at this point is not public. They do anticipate perhaps July or August that they would come out and start taking scoping comments. So again, something that we'll want to be cognizant of. Our next stop was kind of on the south end of Spruce Mountain, and we looked at a bunch of proposed habitat treatment and some of the wildlife habitat values in the area. There's a resident elk herd on Spruce Mountain. It's obviously very important for wintering deer coming out of the East Humboldt Range. We looked at some of the habitat condition. There's some PJ encroachment issues, things of that nature that the Department of Wildlife and BLM have been working on jointly. I think they've analyzed somewhere in the neighborhood of 18,000 acres for potential treatments. That doesn't mean they'd treat the full 18,000, but it would give them a 10 to 15 year window where they could go in and prioritize those treatments, and as implementation dollars come available, they can go in and start treating those areas for those specific values. Our last stop was at Boone Springs, which is up in the upper reaches of Spruce Mountain. When we got there, there were some horses on the spring, and the spring in itself was in very poor condition. It's not an allotment that's been used, I believe, for the last year or 2 by any domestic stock, and the spring condition was very poor. They're basically, we're standing in a riparian area, getting hit in the face with dust blowing from what should be a riparian area. And so that was a bit disheartening to see, I think, from multiple standpoints, and something that can be problematic when you have an HMA that's already over appropriate management level. And so we had some good discussions on that. And going forward, I think those are things that obviously are problematic, but maybe we need to look at as an opportunity to try and improve those situations and be cognizant of anytime we discuss AML and proper management specific to the wild horse and burro issue. So those are kind of the main points in the 3 stops that we took. Again, I'd offer some time to any other commissioners if there's some details that maybe I left out or important points that they'd like to make. It's obviously an issue that we'll keep track of, and I'd like to keep on our radar through the Public Lands Committee.
Okay. Any additional comments from the commissioners that were on the tour? Commissioner Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought it was a very good tour also, and Jeremy pretty much gave us a recap of what we did. What I took away from there were some positives that I'd like to share. First of all is that the BLM is actively seeking other options to dealing with these horse issues. This is one of the options. And there could be some positives that come from that, because as this is used as an example, I think it will lead into one of the main things that I saw over the whole tour, was that possibly we could get away from managing this habitat and rangelands in a preservationist mode and turn more toward productivity. I wish that we would have possibly had more a chance to see a little bit more of what they're doing on the private land and the other 2 allotments that they're interested in moving these horses within. However, on our first stop, we parked right on the fence line next to the private property. And some of the information that I had received originally is that the landowner, when they bought the ranch and then bought the horses, is they took the horses in there and dumped them out. And there are a couple pivots located right there across the fence line. And they expected that the horses would forage on the vegetation that was available on the private property of the ranch, and everything would be fine. However, in a short period of time, there was nothing left. I don't know whether the rest of you guys on the tour noticed that there was new seating under those pivots, which means that they figured out how long they owned that place, a year or a little over a year. They figured out in that length of time that they better produce something on that property. Otherwise, those horses were going to eat them out of house and home. As we were traveling around to these other sites, there had been some done previously in the spruce allotment, some habitat manipulation that was evident, because you could see the vegetation right where the treatments had been done. There were adjacent allotments that belonged to somebody else. I don't even know whose allotments those were, but there had also been more manipulation with way better vegetation. We go around to our second stop, and it just happens to be another site where there's a heritage proposal to do vegetation manipulation for higher productivity of the type of vegetation for the species that we're targeting. By the time we got around to the spring, that was in a pretty degraded condition, we discussed some options that could possibly enhance the water flow and the condition of that spring. There was no discussion, or there may have been some discussion as to that we were over AMLs or the reasons that the spring was degraded, but there was more discussion on how do we fix it. And that's what I took away from this tour, is that there are things that we can do as long as we get together, go out there and assess where we're at and assess where we want to go. And I think this tour, in my mind, was a huge aid in that.
Okay. Commissioner Howell?
I'd like a question for Commissioner Moore. You said there were several options that they were exploring. Is slaughterhouse in that mix at all? They're going to open up a slaughterhouse anytime soon?
Actually, that came up. And the BLM stated at this time that was an option that they could perform. They could perform that.
I know they can.
Funding had been, for lack of the right word, re-implemented in for the inspectors,
RMP.
so that maybe some slaughter
I was
plants
trying to look that up.
could open up. And I understand that that's in the process. However, their reluctance to that was because of
Is that what-
public acceptance
Oh, that's
to
cool.
that practice.
Oh,
The slaughter thing.
yeah. Duct tape. Got to get some duct tape.
Could I make one comment? I learned some things too, as Ken Mayor for the record, that this is not a Madeline Pickens proposal, it's a BLM proposal. And I didn't realize that that's how this had shifted, and when asked if they would have to maybe fence the entire allotment, answer was probably, and I asked who would pay for that, and with the BLM. And so, I mean, there's some huge issues that need to be resolved, and all the water and who owns the water, the change from cattle to horses. What do you do? We stood in one location that had, 3,000 deer that spend part of the winter. And what effect would that have, fencing specifically, in a growing elk herd? So there, I mean, this thing has got so many issues. The EIS phase is going to be unbelievable. And they did get money, I guess, from Washington, D.C. through Director Abbey, an allocation of dollars to do this EIS, which we didn't ask how much the EIS is going to cost, but this is a huge project with so many ramifications you can't even, get your mind wrapped around it, quite frankly.
Commissioner McNinch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that the one thing that you gather out of these things is you get a real good idea of, number one, the area that you're dealing with, but also the issues. And I definitely went in with the impression that the Pickens family had been, that this was privately owned land, and that they were trying to figure out how they were going to, take care of all these horses that they were going to adopt, or, it was going to be a place where wild horses went. And little did I know, that I didn't understand that it's definitely not that. It's a transition of AUMs for cows to horses, and that it is very, very complex. That's not a bad thing, but just understanding the perspective and how things are developing really helps me put things in perspective a little bit. And that it's an interesting direction, interesting proposal. And Pete, you could probably, there was a gentleman, he might be in this office, in the audience for all I know, that was from up here, that had challenged everybody a couple years ago to think outside of the box a little bit. And I don't remember the gentleman's name. It was an editorial that had hit the paper up here. I got an email on it, and a rancher, and basically said, we got to think outside of the box. And this is the kind of stuff that might get us headed down that path a little bit. What we're doing now isn't working. Everybody knows it. It's painful. Maybe there are some alternatives, and Yesterday was an eye-opener for me, not only from a better understanding of it, but just the conceptual stuff, so I appreciated the tour. It was a good tour. I appreciate the time everybody put into it. Caleb, you didn't screw up Dr. Moldy's truck too bad with your way out. I'm sure he doesn't look too worse for wear over it, so.
Okay, any other comments from the commissioners on the wild horse update? Okay, seeing none, let's see, this information. Where are we on the sandwiches? Are we, they're here? Okay, so maybe what we do is break about 5 minutes early for lunch, and we'll pick up after lunch with the regulation workshop, informational items. Well, how much time? Half hour, 45 minutes? What's everybody thinking?
12:30.
30, 41.